Good afternoon, Sharks. I'm offering a 20% stake in my research for the promise of future funding. You've heard a better offer? Okay. By the way, if sometimes you can't hear me, it's because sometimes I'm talking inside parentheses. To give you a little bit of background about this, we have been doing insider threat research for about 15 years. From that research, we have built different kinds of models. Models on like what does it look like when a person engages in insider threat sabotage? What does it look like when they engage in IP, intellectual property theft? What does it look like when they engage in insider fraud, espionage, things like that? Over the last 2 years or so, every service of the military has asked us, will those models also apply to workplace violence, specifically things like active shooter or those that approach the level of active shooter? We've also had other defense agencies and departments ask us, as well as the intelligence community and other executive branch agents. So we decided, let's take a look at what we've done with insider threat sabotage and figure out if there's any commonality between that and workplace violence. So that's what this is really about. Here was our goal. We decided to determine if there was some type of coherent, integrated, and validated indicators that could deal with both of those crimes. Why is that important to you? Because if we could identify things that are common to both, what an organization could potentially do is use the same controls to prevent, detect, and respond to both of those types of crimes without needing to know which kind of crime it was going to turn out to be. So our approach was to collect cases of insider threat from sabotage and also from workplace violence, and we chose active shooter cases within the Department of Defense. We coded those and then additionally coded the sabotage cases we had along the same lines to figure out what was common and what might be different. We did start with a basis of a model that we have discovered to hold true in all the other ways that insiders conduct threats or incidents in the past, and that is this incident pathway. And that is at the very bottom, it starts with people's predispositions. Okay, so what kinds of things make up them as human beings? So on the left side of this pyramid, you'll see examples for insider cyber sabotage. And on the right-hand side, you see just a couple of examples of workplace violence. There are definitely lots and lots and lots of predispositions. These are just some representative ones. Once you have a person's predispositions, you press upon that stressors. So stressors that they have in the workplace, in their personal relationships, finances, all kinds of things. When those stressors combine with the predispositions, you'll end up with potentially concerning behaviors. Concerning behaviors is usually the first point that an organization has any inkling that something might be going wrong. We propose that that is too late, that concerning behaviors, you want to get left of boom, so you want to get back to the stressors and sort of identify where those are going to be. But in this case, a lot of times they see the concerning behavior, and then there's some kind of a problematic organizational response. So for the IT sabotage, you might see that the person gets reprimanded for doing something. They may be even demoted, but their privileges and accesses aren't actually changed to the systems, so they're enabled. On the workplace violence side, they might lose rights, get suspended for privileges and things like that, but don't receive any kind of counseling that helps sort of fix those behaviors that are doing that. So we're not suggesting that people shouldn't get loss of privileges and things like that in those circumstances, but that there needs to be an additional aspect of how to help them cope with what they're dealing with. So at the very top then you have the hostile act. Of course, on the cyber side, it's usually some type of a launching of malicious code or destroying of the systems, and on the workplace violence side, it's active shooter. So we started with this kind of hypothesis that at some point at the very beginning, these two types of crimes would look the same. The people would have similar predispositions, have similar type of stressors, but as time went on and they moved toward the concerning behaviors and toward the hostile act, that they would diverge. So at what point could we have controls that would do both? And then at what point would you have to be able to distinguish that it's going one way or the other? So we started with this thinking that they would look very similar at the very beginning. And we used lots of different methods to try to figure this out. I'm not going to go through all of those methods. Some of them were interesting. Some of them gave us a little bit of clue. But the ones that did the best for us were measuring the stressors. So when we looked at the stressors, we found out that for both types of crimes, the major amount of stress was workplace. So those things caused by the organization or things that happen within the organization. We decided to make it a little bit more granular. So first we started with personal or workplace, and then we had to start breaking it down even further so we could get some more understanding. From workplace, so things like unmet expectations, asked to do things that are above the person's capabilities, asked to do overtime without compensation, any number of things, workplace stressors. We decided to break it also into workplace relationships. So the difference between how they interacted with coworkers and supervisors as to the organization itself. Same thing with personal. We broke that down into financial, relationships, meaning those of your family, friends, those kinds of things. We also looked at mental health. Now, unfortunately, what we determined was that there was a plethora of mental health information in the active shooter, and there was none in the insider cyber sabotage. That kind of made sense to us because when someone does something so shocking as workplace violence, I think people try to figure out what's going on in this person's mind, what's wrong with them mentally that would make them do that. So that information was available. So what we did is we actually split them apart and said, now just tell me the stressors for cyber sabotage and the stressors for workplace violence. What we found is still the number one factor was workplace stress, so organizational stress. The second one for ICS, for the cyber, happened to be workplace relationships. Now, it wasn't the second one for workplace violence, but again, if we removed the mental health, which we didn't have in the cyber, it becomes the third. So it's still an important aspect. Why? Because an organization has the greatest influence or a sphere of influence over workplace stressors and workplace relationship stressors. So our thought process is, if we can help an organization in the future figure out how to measure those workplace stressors and the workplace relationship stressors, and then know when to start interceding and helping a person cope with those, trying to get that back down to a baseline of 0 for that person, they may have a greater chance of avoiding both types of crimes. So actually, what we laid out is we found out that those arrows don't match up at the very beginning. There are some predispositions and some stressors that are actually different for both crimes. But the majority pretty much overlap, okay? Just a few outliers on both types of crimes. So as you move from the left side to the right side, the predisposition stressors, still a lot of commonality. Once the concerning behavior occurs, that's when you start to see more of the deviation. At that point, you're probably going to get a better chance of figuring out which direction the person's going to go in, but not always, because sometimes those behaviors are the same as well. So when it gets to the attack execution, that's really about the first opportunity to make the best decision about whether this is going to be cyber or physical. So what we would do in the future is we already have this causal loop diagram, which we designed in the past for insider cyber sabotage. We would take and overlay what we now know about the workplace violence to see if the same type of causal loops work. So this is coming from a basic systems dynamics background. The idea is when something happens, it either gets better or it gets worse. The organization responds in this way, which either makes it better or worse. If we can say that it's very similar for workplace violence when we build that model, then we give an organization an opportunity to put socio-technical controls in place to either prevent, detect, or respond to both of those types of things.